Okay, so welcome back. And today, we're gonna continue speaking about the passive voice. My name is Ricardo Montoya. I am your teacher for the fifth or the sixth semester. It depends on your group at the SEA in the University of Guanajuato. Okay, so as you remember, if you have been following all the videos in order, we were speaking about the passive voice. We explained the passive voice a few videos ago. We were saying that in the passive voice, the important thing is not the doer of the action. The important thing is the receiver of the action. That's pretty much the thing with the passive voice. So the thing is that in English, well, we have two voices. We can call them voices. I'm going to highlight them. In red, this is the active voice. In the active voice, the subject is the person doing the action. Daniel is the person doing the action. And if we want to replace him with a pronoun, we are using a personal pronoun. Daniel is the third person of the singular, is masculine, so we replace it with he. Okay, I, you, he, she, it, we, you, and they. Those are the personal pronouns. Okay, and then on the other hand, we have the passive voice. What is the passive voice? The passive voice is very similar to the active voice. The only difference is that the subject is not the person doing the action. The subject, sorry, is the person receiving the action of the verb. In this sentence, in the active voice, it says Daniel has painted Paula. Okay, Daniel has painted Paula. Daniel is the doer of the action, and Paula is receiving paint into her body. People are painting her. She is like a wall or like a canvas. Daniel is painting her. In the passive voice, the subject is not the doer of the action. The subject is Paula because she is the receiver of the action. When Paula is the subject, we can replace the noun Paula with a personal pronoun. When we had Paula here in the active voice, she was acting as the receiver of the action, right? Paula was receiving the paint. So when we replace her name, if we don't want to use her name, what we do is we replace her with an object pronoun. We need an object pronoun, okay? In this case, well, in the other hand, in the active voice, in the passive voice, Paula is the receiver of the action. Now she's the subject. If we replace her, we don't use her. We don't use her. We use she, okay? And the same thing happens opposite. Daniel, in the active voice, Daniel was the subject. He was the doer of the action. In the passive voice, Daniel is the person, is the complement. Daniel is not the subject, is just a complement. In the active voice, Daniel was replaced for a personal pronoun, so it was he. In the passive voice, Daniel is the complement, so we call him him. It is him, not he. We change from a personal pronoun to an object pronoun, okay? We know that sentences in English, every sentence in English has the same structure. If they are affirmative statements, they start with the subject. Yep. They need the auxiliary. You have your auxiliary. They need the verb. This is your verb. And then you need your complement. Well, you don't really need it. This is optional. That is why it's in parentheses. But again, it is the same thing. Subject, auxiliary, verb, and complement. It is always the same thing. Remember that if you want to make a negative statement, the auxiliary or the modal verb takes the negative. If you want to make a question, the auxiliary, this word here, switches positions with the subject, and you start auxiliary, subject, verb, and complement. So this is the structure for everything. In the passive voice, we have pretty much the same thing, but the difference is that the subject is not the doer of the action. The subject is the receiver of the action, okay? The auxiliary in the active voice, well, we have different auxiliaries. We know that for the perfect forms, we need the verb have. Have in the present, Yeah, have or has. Have in the past, had, and have in the future, will have. In the passive voice, we need to make something a little different. The auxiliary in the passive voice is going to be always the verb to be, always the verb to be. But this verb to be is conjugated to a time tense. It can be the verb to be in the present, that will be the passive voice in the present. It could be the verb to be in the past, that will be the passive voice in the past. It could be to the future perfect continuous, that will be the passive voice in the future perfect continuous. The verb in the passive voice is always on the past participle, always, okay? And finally, and optionally always, we have the complement. If we want, we can have a complement, okay? So let's check how we have all the elements that we need. Let me just do something. I always forget to do this before time, but I will be erasing the auxiliaries. Erasing the auxiliaries for the passive voice so that we have to think a little bit and maybe it gets a little harder. Okay, so let's check that everything is in order. In the present perfect, do you remember? I don't know if you remember, but we checked this a few episodes ago, a few videos ago, maybe 10 or 15 videos ago. We were speaking about the perfect forms. When do you use the present perfect? The present perfect is used when you are talking about an experience, something that you have done many one time in your life, many 10 times in your life. It doesn't really matter how many times in your life. You can say, I have been to France. That means that at least once or one time you have been to France. You can say, I haven't been to France. And it is also like an unfinished action. If you say, I haven't gone to France, it doesn't mean that you won't. It means that you haven't up until this point. It's not an experience that you have had, but maybe in the future. Yeah, if you say I didn't do my homework, it's a finished action. You didn't do it, you got a 0. If you say I haven't done my homework, you haven't done it, but it's not a finished action. You still have time. You may do it now. Okay, so if you have any problems remembering when or how to use the present perfect, go and check that video. But that's pretty much it. We use it for experiences and for unfinished actions, okay? Things that you have done maybe one time, maybe 2 times, maybe 3 times, or I don't know, 1,000 times. It's not really important. It's for things that you have done or you haven't done. That's pretty much it. Also, we know that the perfect forms, well, the auxiliary of the perfect, well, the present perfect is always the auxiliary to have, but obviously in the present, in the present, okay? So the auxiliary to have in the present is have or has. Remember, in the present, the third person of the singular takes an S. In this case, Daniel is the third person of the singular, is masculine, is he, so he has. And the verb in all perfect forms, the verb is always in the participle. Paint is a regular verb, so painted is the regular termination for, is a regular ending for a verb in participle. So Daniel has painted Paula, he has painted her, okay? We have all the ingredients all at the same time. Subject, auxiliary, verb, and complement. That's perfect, okay? Subject, auxiliary, verb, and complement. The subject is the doer of the action because this is the active voice. If you want to replace the subject, you can use a personal pronoun. If you want to replace the object, you need to use an object pronoun. Okay, so let's focus now on the passive voice. On the passive voice, we have subject again. Okay, perfect. We have the subject, and then we need an auxiliary. We don't really know. We're going to be checking, but the auxiliary goes here. This is the auxiliary. Then we need the verb, and we know that in the passive form, in the passive voice, the verbs are always in the participle. So in this case, they are not going to change because perfect forms use the past participle, and the passive voice also uses the participle. Remember that the participle is not a time tense. The participle is a conjugation. Regular verbs in participle, they finish or they end with the or ed, but we have a lot of irregular verbs, so you need to learn them, okay? And then subject, auxiliary, verb in past participle, and complement. So this is perfect. The subject now is the receiver of the action. Paula didn't paint anyone, or she's not painting anyone. She is receiving the painting. In the passive voice, she is the subject. When Paula is the subject, we replace her with a personal pronoun. In this case, it is the third person of the singular and it is feminine. So we use she, okay? And Daniel, well, Daniel is optional because Daniel is not really a part of this sentence. He is the agent. The agent is the doer of the action. In the active voice, Daniel was super important because he was the subject. It was the most important part of the sentence, right? In the active voice, it is always about the doer. In the passive voice, Daniel is just not that important because the passive voice is focusing on Paula, okay? So Daniel, if you want to mention him, he is an agent, and then we don't replace him with a personal pronoun. Remember that personal pronouns are for subjects. He will be replaced with an object pronoun, okay? Now, the difficult part, the thing that we have to think about a little bit, maybe you saw it before I erased it, but let's think. What is the auxiliary for the passive voice? The auxiliary for the passive voice is always the verb to be, but it has to be conjugated. So the verb to be in the present is are. The problem is that this is not the present. In the future, the verb to be will be. The problem is that this is the auxiliary for the future, for the simple future. No, we need, what do we need? What time tense is this? In this case, we are using the present perfect. This is the present perfect. So we need the verb to be conjugated in the present perfect, okay? How do you conjugate a verb in the present perfect? So let's check. How did we do it? We needed the auxiliary. The auxiliary for the present perfect was have or has. And then what happened? The verb paint in the present perfect is the verb in the past participle. So what do we need if we need the verb to be in present perfect? We need the auxiliary of the present perfect, have or has. In the case of Paula, has. Why? Because Paula is the third person of the singular. Any other subject will be have, okay? And then we need the verb to be, the most important one. This is the auxiliary. The auxiliary is the verb to be. It is conjugated in the present perfect, so it needs the auxiliary of the present perfect, and the verb that you conjugate in the present perfect has to be in the past participle. So the verb to be in the past participle is been. So we have the auxiliary. The auxiliary is two parts, okay? It's two words. Paula has been painted, or she has been painted. Paula has been painted by Daniel, okay? Or if you want to use, well, I can't, sorry. If you want to use contraction, you can say Paula's been. This is the meaning has, okay? This is just a contraction. It can be Paula has been or Paula's been painted by Daniel. So we have subject, auxiliary, verb, and complement. This is perfect. This is the passive voice in the present perfect, okay? So if you want to speak about experiences, you use the present perfect. Aquí en español dice, Daniel ha pintado a Paula. Daniel la ha pintado significa alguna vez. No sé si una vez o muchas veces. Daniel no la ha pintado significa no lo ha hecho, pero tal vez mañana, tal vez pasado. No es una acción terminada. En este caso es afirmativo, entonces es una experiencia. Daniel ha pintado a Paula. Acá lo que dice es, Paula ha sido pintada, que es exactamente lo mismo. Pero lo que estamos haciendo es que estamos haciendo hincapié en que el sujeto ya no es quien hizo la acción. El sujeto es quien recibe la acción. Esa es la voz pasiva, ¿sí? Nuestro sujeto nuestro auxiliar, vamos a explicar otra vez el auxiliar es el verbo to be, pero el verbo to be conjugado, si quieren en presente, si quieren en pasado, pero esta oración está en presente perfecto. Y como está en presente perfecto, pues para pasarla bien, tengo que ponerla también en presente perfecto. Entonces, ¿qué tengo que hacer? Conjugar el verbo to be al presente perfecto. ¿Cómo se conjuga un verbo al presente perfecto? Bueno, aquí conjugamos paint. ¿Cómo le hicimos? Con have o has, dependiendo del sujeto, y el verbo que yo quiera conjugar, en este caso paint, en pasado participio. Entonces, has painted. Aquí pongo el verbo have o has, dependiendo del sujeto, sería has porque es she, y el verbo que yo quiero conjugar, que ya no es paint, es el verbo to be, porque este siempre es el auxiliar de la voz pasiva. En pasado participio, has been. Okay? So, this is the present perfect. What about the past perfect? Let's remember some things about the past perfect. First, when do you use the past perfect? I don't know if you remember, again, this is something that we checked a few videos ago. The past perfect is used, it is known as the past of the past. The past perfect is when you are telling a story, maybe you have two different moments. One is the recent past, the other one is the far away, the remote past. You have the recent past and the remote past, okay? If you want to make a difference, you use the simple past for the recent past and the past perfect for the previous past. So for example, yesterday I was happy to see my friend. Yesterday I was happy. That is the simple past. Yesterday is the recent past. It's something that happened 24 hours ago. I was happy. And then you ask me, why were you so happy? Or why were you happy? I was happy to see my friend because I hadn't seen him in 10 years. If I tell you I hadn't seen him, it means previous to the moment in the past, both moments are finished, both are in the past. But the recent past, yesterday, I was happy. And previous to yesterday, before yesterday, I hadn't seen my friend in 10 years. So you have the past and something previous to the past of the past. We had another example. We were saying something like, I just ate a whole pizza. I ate a complete pizza. And then people ask you, why did you eat a whole pizza? And then I respond, I was very hungry because I hadn't eaten anything all day. If I say I hadn't eaten anything all day, it means I ate a whole pizza in the recent past, maybe an hour ago. I ate a complete pizza because before this hour, like 12 hours ago, during the whole day, I hadn't eaten anything. I ate a whole pizza because I hadn't eaten anything. One is the recent past, and the other one is the previous past, is the far away past, okay? So in this case, well, Daniel had painted Paula. It means that Daniel in the past had done this. He had painted Paula. Not anymore. He's not doing it, but this happened previous to something else. Yes, this is a finished action that happened before something else. Daniel had painted Paula before we left. Okay, we have the simple past, we left, this is over, and we have Daniel had painted Paula. So what happened first? First, he painted Paula, this is the remote past, and then we left. This is the recent past. You have two pasts, the remote past and the recent past, okay? So, okay. In this case, the past perfect, what do we need to make the past perfect? We need subject is the doer of the action. In this case, is Daniel. If we want to replace Daniel because he is the subject, we can replace him with a personal pronoun, he. The auxiliary for the past perfect is the verb to have, but in the past, not in the present, in the past. This is the past perfect. So the past of have is had. The auxiliary is always had. It doesn't change. It doesn't matter who the subject is. There is only one auxiliary for the past perfect. It is always had. And then we need a verb. Perfect forms, they always need the verb in the past participle. Remember, painted is a regular verb, so it finishes with the or ed. In the case of irregular verbs, well, you will have to remember the forms, okay? And then finally, we need a complement. Well, it's not necessary, but it is optional. We have a complement. In this case, this complement is the object. Paula is not the person painting. She doesn't have a brush in her hand. She doesn't have paint in her hands. She is being painted. I mean, she is receiving the paint on her body. Someone is painting her. Or maybe she is like the model and another person is using her as a model. So Daniel had painted Paula. Paula didn't do anything. She was the object of being painted, okay? Now, because Paula is the object, we can replace her with an object pronoun, her, not she. She is for subjects. Paula is the object. So we have subject, auxiliary, verb, and complement. Perfect. Everything's okay. Now, what happens in the passive voice? In the passive voice, we have the subject, but the subject is not the person doing the action. The subject of the passive voice is always the receiver. So the subject is now Paula. The important person to us is Paula. So Paula, if we want to replace her name and want to use a pronoun, we use a personal pronoun. In this case, the personal pronoun will be she. In the active voice, it was her because she was the object. In the passive voice, it is she because she is the subject. Then we need an auxiliary. We don't really know what it is yet. We're gonna check that. Then we need the verb, and the verb in the passive voice is always in the participle. So there is no difference. The active voice, the perfect forms, they always use the participle. The passive voice, it always uses the participle. This is never going to change. And then finally, and optionally, we can add the doer of the action. We can add Daniel, but Daniel is not the center of attention anymore. In the active voice, Daniel was the most important part. He was the doer of the action. He was the subject, and we replace it with a personal pronoun. In the active voice, Daniel is just a complement. He's not that important. If we don't say his name, nothing happens. We are placing the importance on Paula, okay? This is about Paula. So Daniel is part of the complement, and if we want to replace this noun, we use an object pronoun, not personal pronouns. In the active voice, it was he because it was the subject. In the passive voice, it is him because it is the complement. Now, the only thing that we are missing is the auxiliary. What do you think is the auxiliary for the passive voice? For the past perfect. In the past perfect, we need the auxiliary had. We have it here, had, and we need a verb in the past participle. So in this case, we need had plus a verb in past participle. Which verb do we need? Which is this verb? Right, the verb to be. The passive voice always uses the verb to be as the auxiliary. The verb to be, so we need have and the verb to be in the past participle. Been. Have been. In the present perfect, has been or have been. In the past perfect, have been. Okay? This is super good. We have again one and two parts, but it's just an auxiliary that has two words. That's it. Now, the future perfect. First, when do you use the future perfect? If you don't remember, let's try and check again. The future perfect is used when you are speaking about an event in the future. It's not now, it's tomorrow or the day after tomorrow or next week. It's in the future. But you're saying that an action will be in progress. That an action, no, that was the future continuous. You are saying that an action will have finished by a certain point in the future, okay? So you can say something like, Daniel will have painted Paula next Wednesday. So this is in the future, yeah? He will have painted Paula. It hasn't happened. Today is, let's say today is Monday. Okay, so this is next Wednesday. In this moment, the next Wednesday, in 48 hours, this will have finished. Maybe tomorrow, on Tuesday, they have an appointment, and Daniel is supposed to paint Paula on Tuesday. So on Wednesday, this will have finished. Yes? sería en español algo así como Daniel habrá pintado a Paula. Está en el futuro porque todavía no la pinta. Hoy es lunes y para el miércoles ya la habrá pintado. A lo mejor tienen una cita el martes, ¿sí? Entonces, el martes que Daniel vea a Paula, la va a pintar y el miércoles ya lo habrá terminado. Esta acción de pintarla ya va a estar terminada. Hoy está en el futuro, pero en este momento del futuro ya va a estar en el pasado. Es una cosa un poco extraña, ¿ok? That is the future perfect. So again, what do we need to make sentences in English? We need subject, auxiliary, verb, and complement. You're going to hate me at the end of the semester because I don't know how many times I have said this. Subject, auxiliary, verb, and complement. The auxiliary for the future perfect is the verb to have, but not in the present. It's not have or has. Not in the past. It's not have. It's in the future. What is the verb to have in the future? Will have. Remember, we don't really have conjugations for the future. Verbs don't have a future conjugation. So when you want to conjugate a verb in the future, you only say will and then the verb. Will have. So we have will have. Okay? This is my auxiliary. It's two parts. And then, because this is a perfect form, the verb is always in the participle. Again, this is a regular verb. It ends with ed or with the. If it was an irregular verb, well, you need to memorize those. I will give you some PDFs, some files, some lists. You have to check them. There are some verbs that you just have to memorize, okay? Then after that, at the end, optionally, we have the complement. In this case, the complement is an object, and this object is the person receiving the action of the verb. The verb is painting. Daniel does the action of painting, and Paula receives the action of being painted. Okay? Solo porque tenemos objeto es que se puede hacer la voz pasiva. Si no tuviéramos un objeto, no se podría hacer la voz pasiva. Porque ¿de qué se trata la voz pasiva? ¿Se acuerdan? La voz pasiva se trata de el sujeto. De que el sujeto ya no es quien hace la acción. El sujeto es quien recibe la acción. Ahora el sujeto ya no es Daniel, ahora el sujeto es Paula. Cuando el sujeto era Daniel, lo podíamos reemplazar con el pronombre personal he. He, she, it, I, you, we, they son pronombres personales y los usamos para cambiar sujetos. ¿Sí? Como ella es el sujeto, pues le ponemos un pronombre personal. Aquí también en la voz activa, Paula era el objeto. Y cuando tenemos un objeto, bueno, un objeto es un tipo de complemento, no la reemplazamos con un pronombre personal. No ponemos she, ponemos un pronombre de objeto. En este caso, ya no es her, ahora es she. ¿Por qué? Porque ya no es el objeto, ahora es el sujeto. Cambió, ahora es la parte más importante de la oración. What do we need? What do we need after the subject? We need the auxiliary, okay? An auxiliary. We're going to check what the auxiliary is. And then we need the verb. Because this is the passive voice, the verb is always in the past participle. Always in the past participle, okay? And finally, and again, optionally, we have a complement. In this case, we can have many different types of complements. We can say yesterday, or the other day, or very well. We have complements of time, of place, or how. This kind of complement, this specific type of complement is called the agent. Who is the agent? The agent is the doer of the action. In the active voice, the doer of the action is the subject. In the passive voice, the subject is the receiver. So the doer is just a type of complement that we can use. Daniel is not the subject anymore. He is a complement. When you want to replace Daniel, you use an object pronoun. Why? Because this is not the subject, it's the object. They switch positions, okay? So the last thing that we have to check is the auxiliary. What do we need? We need the verb to be. Remember, the verb to be. In what time tense? In the future perfect continuous. How do we do that? Let's check. How did we did it here? How did we do it here? We have an auxiliary and a verb in the past participle. The auxiliary is will have, and the verb is, well, whatever verb you want, okay? If we need the verb to be in the future perfect, how do we do that? Well, we need the auxiliary, we need will be, and then we need the verb to be in the past participle. Been. Will be been. It's not very common. It's the future perfect. It is the future perfect on the passive voice. You're not going to find it that often. It's not the most common thing. But this auxiliary has 1, 2, 3 parts. Okay, and again, very simple. This is the verb to be conjugated in the future perfect, and it works like the auxiliary for the passive voice. The verb is always in the past participle, and then we have the complement. So it is perfect. Paula will be being, it's not, yeah. Paula will be being painted by Daniel. She will be being painted by him. Ella estará siendo pintada por él. Paula estará siendo pintada. ¿Sí? Paula ha sido pintada. Paula había sido pintada. Paula habrá sido pintada. Eso es lo que tenemos. El futuro perfecto en voz pasiva. Otra vez, no es la cosa más común del mundo, no lo van a encontrar muy seguido, pero de que se puede, pues se puede. Now, do you remember how to make negatives? Very simple, right? The auxiliary takes the negative. Daniel has painted Paula. Daniel hasn't painted Paula. He hasn't painted Paula. Okay? Daniel had painted Paula. Daniel hadn't painted Paula. He hadn't painted Paula. Daniel will have painted Paula. What happens when we have 2 words as the auxiliary, 1 and 2? Only the first one takes the negative. So you say, Paula won't have, Daniel won't have painted Paula, or he won't have painted Paula. Very good. It is always the same. How do we do it in the passive voice? Again, we have 1, 2 parts. What happens when we have 2 parts? Only the first part takes the negative. Hasn't been painted. Hasn't been painted. Paula hasn't been painted by Daniel. She hasn't been painted by him. Okay? In the past perfect, again, when you have 2 words, the first one takes the negative. So, hadn't. Paula hadn't been painted by Daniel. She hadn't been painted by him. Perfect. And what about the future perfect? We have 3 words. What happens when we have 3 words? The same thing. If you have 2 words, the first one takes the negative. If you have 3 words, only the first one takes the negative. Instead of will, you will say won't. Paula won't be being painted by Daniel. She won't be being painted by, sorry. I made a huge mistake here. It's not will be. I think you saw it. It's not will be. Will be is the auxiliary. Let me just erase everything. Clear all drawings. Okay. Okay. This is important. I got confused. The future perfect is not will be. Again, is will have. I have it here. I mean, I don't know why I said will have. Will be. It is always will have. We have it on the. We have it here. Will have. So, Daniel will have painted. He will have painted. In the passive voice, will have been and will have been. What is the process? Again, I'm sorry about that. We have the auxiliary. Yes, we have the auxiliary for the future perfect is will have, and the verb is in the past participle. If we need the future continuous in the passive voice, we need the verb to be instead of the verb to paint. So we say the auxiliary is will be, so we say will be. Sorry, it's not will be. Will have, sorry. Will have, and then the verb is in the past participle. Which verb? The verb to be. This is the most important verb. Will have been. So Paula will have been painted, okay? Or in negative, sorry, will have been painted. Or in negative, if we have 1, 2, 3 parts, the first part changes. Won't. Paula won't have been painted. She won't have been painted. Okay? It is always. In the present perfect, has been. In the past perfect, have in the past and been. In the future, have in the future and been. ¿Sí? El auxiliar siempre es el verbo to be conjugado en el presente perfecto, en el pasado perfecto, en el futuro perfecto. ¿Cuál es el verbo to be en presente perfecto? Have o has been. En el pasado perfecto, had been, y en el futuro perfecto, will have been. Y el verbo siempre va en pasado participio. ¿Sí? Ahora, una cosa más. Do you remember how to make questions? Subject, auxiliary. To make questions, you have to use the auxiliary and you switch positions. You start with the auxiliary, okay? So in the active voice, this is the auxiliary, has, you switch it. First auxiliary and next subject, and this is a question. Has Daniel painted Paula? Has he painted her? This is a yes or no question. The only possible answer is yes, he has, or no, he hasn't. That's it. How do you make a question with the past perfect? Again, the auxiliary switches positions with the subject. The auxiliary switches positions with the subject. Okay? So, had Daniel painted Paula? Had he painted her? Yes, he had. No, he hadn't. When we have two words, only the first one switches positions. Okay? So, it says, will Daniel have painted Paula? Will he have painted her? Will he have painted her? Yes, he will, or no, he won't. That's pretty much it. What about the passive voice? Again, we have 1 and 2 words as the complement, as the auxiliary, sorry. Only the first word switches positions. So it says, has Paula been painted by Daniel? Yes, she has, or no, she hasn't. Has she been painted by him? Yes, she has, or no, she hasn't. In the past perfect, had Paula been painted by Daniel? Yes, she had, or no, she hadn't. What happens when we have 1, 2, 3 words? Remember that only the first one takes the negative? Again, only the first one switches positions with the subject. You don't switch the 3 words, only the first one. So it says, will Paula have been painted by Daniel? Will she have been painted by him? ¿Sí? Aquí dice, Paula ha sido pintada, Paula había sido pintada y Paula habrá sido pintada. Como pregunta, ¿ha sido pintada Paula? ¿Había sido pintada Paula? ¿Habrá sido pintada Paula? Eso es todo. El presente perfecto se utiliza para cuando tenemos experiencias o para acciones no terminadas. El pasado perfecto es el pasado del pasado, son antecedentes, cosas que pasaron en un pasado anterior. Y el futuro perfecto se usa para cosas que habrán sucedido en un momento en el futuro. Mañana en la noche yo ya habré ido al doctor, ¿ok? Todavía no voy, mi cita es mañana, pero en la noche ya habré ido, ¿ok? Aquí es lo mismo, en algún momento en el futuro, Paula ya habrá sido pintada, ¿sí? Tenemos la voz activa, que se centra en el sujeto, que es quien hace la acción, y la voz pasiva, que también se centra en el sujeto, pero el sujeto es quien recibe la acción. Si se dan cuenta, no hemos roto ninguna regla. Ya llegamos a los tiempos simples, los tiempos continuos, los tiempos perfectos, en voz activa y en voz pasiva. Solo nos faltan los perfectos continuos. Voy a cortarle aquí para que no sean tan largos, se están quedando como de media hora cada video. Si me lo aventara todo junto serían 2 horas, 2 horas y media. Y bueno, ahorita ya llevamos más de 40 videos, yo creo que en total van a ser cerca de 60. pero bueno, ese es el número de clases que teníamos. En teoría teníamos 90 horas de clase, son 60 clases de 1 hora y media, entonces, pues los videos no son de 1 hora y media, entonces, en realidad, esto no es todo, vamos a estar haciendo ejercicios, como saben, bueno, ya estamos en el capítulo 40, entonces ya saben cómo estamos haciendo ejercicios, estamos también, teniendo sesiones virtuales para checar todas las dudas, estamos haciendo los exámenes en sesiones especiales, entonces, bueno, así es como está funcionando esto. Yo sé que es un montón de información, pero no son las 90 horas que serían presencialmente, ¿sí? Además, se quedan aquí grabadas, eso es muy bueno, porque si tienen ustedes cualquier duda, pueden regresar y volver a ver el video, adelantar, atrasar. Una disculpa otra vez, por si no se dieron cuenta, tuve un error en el futuro perfecto continuo. Tuve que borrarlo todo porque lo había puesto con will be been, y eso no tiene ningún sentido. Eso era el futuro continuo, este es el futuro perfecto, es will have been, ¿ok? Me disculpo en esa parte, lo voy a escribir aquí nada más para que quede pues como registro y que nadie se confunda en ese sentido. El futuro continuo el auxiliar en voz pasiva es will be being, ¿sí? Es will be y el verbo en ing. El futuro perfecto es el verbo to be, pero no es will be, es will have, y el verbo ya no va en ing, sino que el verbo va en participio. Tenemos will have y el verbo en participio. Completo, las 3 palabras, es el auxiliar del futuro continuo. She will be being painted. Siempre va en participio. Aquí sería she will have been painted, siempre en participio. Cuando es voz pasiva, siempre es en participio, ¿sí? Siempre es en participio. Y como se dan cuenta aquí, siempre tenemos el auxiliar, es el verbo to be, pero está conjugado dependiendo, bueno, en el futuro perfecto con el auxiliar del futuro perfecto, en el futuro continuo con el auxiliar del futuro continuo, ¿sí? Aquí dice ella estará siendo pintada, esto estará en progreso. Aquí dice ella habrá sido pintada, ya se habrá acabado. Mañana en la tarde, hoy es lunes, mañana a las 2 ella estará siendo pintada, ¿sí? Ya quedaron de acuerdo Daniel y Paula, entonces mañana en la tarde ella estará siendo pintada. Entonces, el miércoles que yo vea a Paula, ella ya habrá sido pintada. ¿Sí me explico? Ok. Cualquier duda, cualquier pregunta, cualquier cuestión, pueden preguntarme directamente o también podemos checarlas en las clases de Zoom, que se tratan básicamente de tener un pizarrón abierto y checar todas las dudas posibles. También estoy dejando aquí entre los videos actividades de lectura, de escritura, de listening. También les voy a poner otros listenings para los exámenes, algunas otras cosas. Entonces, bueno, cualquier duda, aquí estamos, ¿ok? So, thank you very much. And I think that's it for right now. For today, I will say, but maybe for right now. I'll see you in the future. Okay. In the future, perfect. Bye.